Part 1. The snow begins to fall. By late afternoon, the snow had already begun covering the hedgerow surrounding Ashcombe village in soft white silence. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple, seated comfortably beside the fire at the Bluebell tea room, watched the weather deepen thoughtfully through the frosted windows while stirring tea with absent-minded care. Snow altered villages strangely. It softened ugly things, concealed muddy roads, muted gossip temporarily. But it also trapped people together, and human beings, Miss Marple had often observed, became far more dangerous when unable to escape one another. Mrs. Elspeth Turner, owner of the tea room and possessor of an alarming appetite for village information, leaned across the counter dramatically. "They say the storm may last all night." "Interesting indeed." "Do they indeed?" Miss Marple replied gently. Mrs. Turner lowered her voice despite no one else being present. "And poor Sir Alfred has guests arriving tonight at Blackthorn Cottage." Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred Pennington was Ashcombe's most important resident, and unquestionably its least loved. A retired magistrate with a stiff back, sharp tongue, and rigid sense of morality, he had spent years passing judgment upon other people, both inside courtrooms and outside them. Many villagers respected him, very few liked him. Miss Marple took another sip of tea quietly. "How many guests?" "4 staying overnight, apparently." Mrs. Turner shook her head. "Foolish weather for social gatherings, if you ask me. Interesting indeed. Though people rarely chose dangerous evenings knowingly, perhaps. Blackthorn Cottage itself stood nearly a mile beyond the village edge, isolated among barren winter trees and narrow winding roads that became almost impossible during heavy snowfall. A beautiful place, perhaps, but lonely. Interesting indeed." Mrs. Turner continued eagerly. "There's Sir Alfred's niece, Miss Lydia Pennington, of course, then Dr. Julian Reeves from London," she paused meaningfully, "and Mr. Peter Wainwright. Interesting indeed." Miss Marple looked up mildly. "The solicitor?" "Yes." Interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright handled much of Sir Alfred's financial business these days, and possessed the nervous expression of a man perpetually expecting bad news. "And the 4th guest?" asked Miss Marple softly. Mrs. Turner hesitated slightly. "Arthur Vale." "Very interesting indeed." Miss Marple knew the name at once, though she said nothing immediately. Arthur Vale had once stood trial before Sir Alfred Pennington nearly 12 years earlier. A terrible case involving theft and accidental death at a textile warehouse in Kent. Interesting indeed. Vale maintained innocence throughout proceedings. Sir Alfred sentenced him harshly regardless. The case ruined the young man completely. Interesting indeed. "And Sir Alfred invited him personally?" Miss Marple asked quietly. "So they say." "Interesting indeed. That was peculiar indeed. People rarely invited ruined men to dinner parties during snowstorms without reason." Miss Marple finished tea thoughtfully, while outside the snowfall thickened steadily. Something about the situation unsettled her faintly, though she could not yet explain why. Interesting indeed. Later that evening, while darkness settled over Ashcombe beneath swirling snow, Blackthorn Cottage glowed warmly against the storm like isolated lantern light. The cottage itself was larger than its name suggested. Old stone walls, narrow windows, and deep fireplaces giving it the appearance of a small manor house forgotten by time. Inside, however, the atmosphere felt considerably less warm. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred Pennington stood near the drawing-room fire holding brandy glass with the same stern precision he brought to courtrooms decades earlier. Age had not softened him. If anything, it sharpened him further. His niece Lydia sat quietly near the piano, pretending read a magazine while listening nervously to every conversation. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia Pennington possessed beauty of a quiet, restrained sort. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, and expression suggesting years spent suppressing stronger emotions carefully. Dr. Julian Reeves, meanwhile, leaned against the mantelpiece speaking politely about road conditions, while Arthur Vale sat near the far window unusually silent. Interesting indeed. Arthur looked older than his 40 years perhaps. Prison and disgrace aged men quickly. Peter Wainwright arrived last, brushing snow from coat sleeves with obvious irritation. "Roads are becoming impossible," he muttered. Another hour and no one will leave this place tonight. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred gave a dry little smile. Then fortunately no one needs to. Interesting indeed. Something about the remark sounded less hospitable than final. Dinner proceeded stiffly, very stiffly indeed. Conversations faltered repeatedly beneath invisible tensions while snow battered the windows harder each hour. Miss Lydia attempted discussing music. Dr. Reeves mentioned London hospitals. Peter Wainwright spoke anxiously about investments. Only Arthur Vale remained mostly silent. Interesting indeed. Yet Miss Lydia watched him frequently when others were distracted. Very interesting indeed. Sir Alfred noticed it too, perhaps, because midway through dinner he suddenly addressed Arthur directly. "You've said very little tonight, Mr. Vale." Arthur lifted calm eyes slowly. "I was not aware conversation required obligation." Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. Sir Alfred smiled faintly, though no warmth touched it. Still resentful after all these years. Silence settled heavily across the table. Interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright stared downward immediately while Lydia's fingers tightened visibly around her wineglass. Arthur answered quietly. "You sent an innocent man to prison." Interesting indeed. No anger in his voice, only certainty, which somehow felt worse. Sir Alfred remained unmoved. "The jury convicted you. You guided them." Interesting indeed. The storm outside intensified sharply then, wind rattling windows violently like unseen hands against glass. Lydia spoke quickly, attempting change subject. "Uncle Alfred? Perhaps coffee in the drawing room?" "Yes," Sir Alfred said shortly. Interesting indeed. After dinner they gathered beside the large drawing-room fire while servants cleared the table elsewhere inside the house. The grandfather clock ticked steadily near the staircase. Snow drifted endlessly beyond dark windows. Oh, interesting indeed. Miss Lydia played piano softly for several minutes while Dr. Reeves discussed recent medical conferences. Yet tension remained present constantly beneath the surface like thin ice over deep water. Interesting indeed. Around 9 o'clock Sir Alfred rose abruptly. "I have business matters discussing privately with Mr. Wainwright." The solicitor looked startled. "Now?" "Yes." "Interesting indeed." Sir Alfred turned toward Arthur Vale afterward. "And perhaps afterward you and I should finally settle old grievances honestly." Silence again. Interesting indeed. Arthur held his gaze calmly. "As you wish." Miss Lydia stopped playing piano entirely now. Interesting indeed. Fear, perhaps. Sir Alfred and Peter Wainwright disappeared toward the study while remaining guests lingered uneasily beside the fire. Dr. Reeves attempted conversation without success. Arthur Vale stood silently near the window watching snow. Interesting indeed. Then, quite suddenly, Lydia crossed quietly toward him. "You should leave tomorrow morning before anything worse happens," she whispered urgently. "Very interesting indeed." Arthur looked toward her carefully. "Too late, perhaps." "Interesting indeed." Before Lydia could answer, raised voices echoed faintly from somewhere deeper inside the cottage. Sir Alfred shouting. Peter Wainwright responding sharply. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves looked up uneasily. "What was that?" No one answered immediately. Then silence returned once more. Heavy silence. Interesting indeed. A few minutes later, Peter Wainwright emerged alone from the corridor, looking pale and visibly shaken. "Sir Alfred wishes remaining undisturbed for half an hour," he said quickly. "Interesting indeed." "Is something wrong?" asked Lydia. "No." "Too quickly, perhaps." "Interesting indeed." He poured himself brandy with trembling fingers afterward. Outside the storm worsened further. Snow now buried roads completely while fierce wind howled across the isolated countryside surrounding Blackthorn Cottage. No one could leave now. No one could arrive. Interesting indeed. And somewhere beyond the drawing room, behind closed study doors, Sir Alfred Pennington remained alone. Or so everyone believed. The body in the study. The storm continued through the night with almost unnatural fury. Interesting indeed. Snow buried the narrow Ashcombe roads beneath thick white drifts, while fierce wind rattled Blackthorn Cottage relentlessly, like an impatient visitor demanding entry. Inside the drawing room, however, time seemed strangely suspended. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. The fire crackled softly, and tension thickened with every passing minute. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia Pennington sat rigidly beside the piano now, no longer pretending interest in music. Peter Wainwright drank brandy too quickly while Dr. Julian Reeves attempted reading an old newspaper without turning a single page. Arthur Vale remained near the window, watching snow. Interesting indeed. No one mentioned Sir Alfred again initially, though everyone clearly listened for movement elsewhere inside the cottage. At 9:30, the grandfather clock suddenly gave an unpleasant metallic cough, then stopped. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves looked upward. Odd. Peter Wainwright glanced nervously toward the hallway. That clock breaks constantly. Interesting indeed. Yet the explanation sounded rehearsed somehow. The frozen hands remained fixed stubbornly at exactly 28 minutes to 10. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia rose quietly. I should check on Uncle Alfred. Peter Wainwright reacted too quickly. No. Silence followed. Interesting indeed. Everyone looked toward him. The solicitor attempted weak smile afterward. I mean, Sir Alfred specifically requested privacy. Interesting indeed. But Lydia already looked frightened now. Mr. Wainwright, what exactly happened in the study? Nothing. Too quickly again. Interesting indeed. Arthur Vale finally turned from the window. You seem remarkably nervous for a man claiming nothing occurred. Interesting indeed. Peter flushed sharply. You're hardly in position questioning anyone. Very interesting indeed. Years of resentment flickered suddenly between the two men. Dr. Reeves stood abruptly. This is absurd. I'm going to see whether Sir Alfred requires anything. Interesting indeed. No one stopped him this time. The doctor disappeared down the dim corridor toward the study while remaining guests waited uneasily beside the dying fire. Outside, the storm screamed across the countryside. Inside the cottage, silence deepened. Interesting indeed. Then suddenly, a shout, sharp, horrified. Dr. Reeves! Miss Lydia was first reaching the corridor, the others followed immediately. Footsteps echoing against dark wooden floors while wind battered the house violently beyond narrow windows. The study door stood partly open. Inside, Sir Alfred Pennington sat collapsed beside his desk, dead. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia gave soft broken cry. Peter Wainwright staggered backward, visibly pale, while Arthur Vale remained completely motionless near the doorway. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves knelt beside the body, grim-faced. He's gone. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred had been stabbed once directly through the chest with a narrow steel letter opener still protruding beneath his ribs. Death appeared swift indeed. The desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, while snow hissed softly against frosted windows nearby. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia clutched the doorway, trembling. Oh, God! Dr. Reeves rose slowly. We must notify police immediately. Peter Wainwright laughed weakly. In this storm? Interesting indeed. Quite impossible indeed, perhaps. Telephone lines frequently failed during heavy snow, and Blackthorn Cottage stood isolated already. Still, Dr. Reeves crossed quickly toward the study telephone anyway. Dead. Interesting indeed. No signal whatsoever. Arthur Vale, meanwhile, walked slowly farther into the study, observing the room with unsettling calmness. Interesting indeed. The dead man sat half-turned beside his chair as though interrupted mid-conversation. Papers scattered loosely across the desk while one drawer remained slightly open. Interesting indeed. Then Arthur noticed something else. The window. Everyone looked sharply. Interesting indeed. The study window stood open perhaps 2 inches despite the freezing weather. Snow drifted lightly across the carpet beneath it. Dr. Reeves frowned immediately. Was someone trying escape? Peter Wainwright stared. But that's impossible. Interesting indeed. Outside the window stretched untouched snow several feet deep beneath moonlit storm. No footprints, no disturbance, nothing. Interesting indeed. Arthur closed the window carefully against the wind. No one entered or left through there. Interesting indeed. Yet someone clearly opened it recently. Miss Lydia whispered faintly. Then the murderer must still be inside the house. Silence settled heavily across the study. Interesting indeed. Because, yes, there were only 5 people now inside isolated Blackthorn Cottage, and one of them killed Sir Alfred Pennington. Dr. Reeves straightened quietly. No one leaves until police arrive tomorrow. Interesting indeed. Reasonable certainly, though unnecessary perhaps. No one could leave regardless. Peter Wainwright wiped perspiration nervously from his forehead. This is madness. Interesting indeed. Arthur Vale's expression remained unreadable. Yes. Very interesting indeed. Inspector Harold Finch arrived shortly after dawn the following morning, having struggled through impossible roads alongside 2 exhausted constables and half the village snow-clearing crew. Interesting indeed. By then, Blackthorn Cottage resembled island trapped beneath endless white silence. Inspector Finch was practical man with tired eyes, an unfortunate tendency toward premature conclusions. Interesting indeed. He examined Sir Alfred's body carefully while Dr. Reeves explained discovery of the crime. Estimated time of death? Finch asked. The doctor glanced toward the broken grandfather clock visible from the study doorway. Likely around 9:30, perhaps. Interesting indeed. The stopped clock silently reinforced the assumption. Inspector Finch nodded thoughtfully. And everyone else remained together in drawing room? Yes, said Peter Wainwright quickly. Interesting indeed. Too quickly, perhaps. Arthur Vale leaned against the mantelpiece nearby, watching proceedings calmly. The inspector turned sharply toward him. You were previously convicted by Sir Alfred, correct? Interesting indeed. Straight toward obvious motive, very typical. Yes. And invited here last night for what purpose? Arthur's expression hardened faintly. Ask the dead man. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch clearly disliked him immediately. Miss Lydia, meanwhile, sat pale and exhausted near the fire while servants whispered anxiously elsewhere inside the house. Interesting indeed. Snow and murder transformed even large houses into prisons rapidly. The inspector continued questioning each guest separately through the morning. Dr. Reeves admitted hearing arguments earlier between Sir Alfred and both Peter Wainwright and Arthur Vale. Interesting indeed. Peter reluctantly confessed financial disagreements with Sir Alfred involving investments. Interesting indeed. Money always arrived eventually. And Lydia? Ah, very interesting indeed. Miss Lydia admitted secretly meeting Arthur Vale previously several times within Ashcombe Village. Inspector Finch looked sharply interested. You know each other well? A pause. Yes. Interesting indeed. How well? Lydia lowered her eyes. We intended marrying. Silence. Interesting indeed. Arthur Vale looked genuinely startled then. Interesting indeed. Perhaps he had not expected her confession openly. Inspector Finch frowned heavily. So Sir Alfred opposed this arrangement? Yes. Interesting indeed. Quite strongly, perhaps. And last night, Lydia swallowed faintly. My uncle threatened disinheriting me entirely. Interesting indeed. Strong motive indeed, suddenly. Yet Miss Marple, arriving at Blackthorn Cottage shortly before noon, alongside Mrs. Turner delivering supplies from the village, found herself far less interested in motives initially than smaller peculiarities. Interesting indeed. Because yes, people killed for money, for resentment, for love. But objects rarely lied. Miss Marple entered the drawing room quietly while Inspector Finch summarised the case impatiently. Simple enough, he declared. One of the guests entered study briefly while others distracted. Interesting indeed. Simple solutions, often dangerous indeed. Miss Marple listened politely while her eyes wandered toward the grandfather clock. Still broken. Still frozen at precisely 28 minutes to 10. Interesting indeed. Then her gaze shifted lower, toward the carpet beneath the clock. Ah, very interesting indeed. Something tiny glittered beside the skirting board near the clock case. Miss Marple bent slowly. A knitting needle, broken neatly in half. The broken clock. Inspector Finch disliked complications. Interesting indeed. The discovery of the broken knitting needle immediately complicated matters. Miss Marple stood quietly beside the grandfather clock, holding the slender silver fragment delicately between gloved fingers, while the inspector frowned with visible irritation. A knitting needle? He repeated. Yes. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple examined it thoughtfully. Not merely dropped, perhaps. broken deliberately. Interesting indeed. Mrs. Lydia Pennington looked startled. That belongs to me. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch turned sharply. You're certain? Yes. Lydia hesitated faintly. I was knitting yesterday afternoon before dinner. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple glanced toward the clock again. The needle fragment had lodged partially beneath the wooden case itself, almost hidden from sight. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch crossed his arms. And how exactly did it end up there? Lydia shook her head weakly. I don't know. Interesting indeed. No one ever knew initially, perhaps. The inspector pocketed the needle fragment with theatrical importance, before returning attention toward his preferred suspect, Arthur Vale. Interesting indeed. After all, Arthur possessed obvious motive, prior resentment, and sufficiently tragic history to satisfy police imagination neatly. Too neatly, perhaps. Miss Marple seated herself quietly beside the fire while questioning continued. Outside, snow still blanketed Blackthorn Cottage entirely, though the storm itself had weakened overnight. Pale winter sunlight now touched frozen windows and white fields beyond. Beautiful, perhaps, and deceptive. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch paced slowly through the drawing room. Let us be practical, he announced. Sir Alfred invited Mr. Vale here despite past history. They argued. Shortly afterward, Sir Alfred was murdered. Interesting indeed. Arthur Vale remained calm. You omitted several details. Oh? Yes. Interesting indeed. Arthur's eyes hardened faintly. Sir Alfred argued with Peter Wainwright also. The solicitor stiffened immediately. That concerned business matters only. Interesting indeed. And he threatened Lydia regarding inheritance, Arthur continued quietly. Interesting indeed. The room tightened once more beneath invisible pressure. Inspector Finch frowned impatiently. Everyone had disagreements with the victim, perhaps, but you possessed deepest grievance. Arthur gave slight bitter smile. Yes. Interesting indeed, not denial. Never reassuring when suspects avoided denial. Inspector Finch stepped closer. You were imprisoned because of Sir Alfred. I was. And you blamed him? Yes. Interesting indeed. Still calm, still controlled. Yet Miss Marple observed something curious. Arthur Vale never once asked whether police suspected him. Interesting indeed. Truly guilty people often worried about suspicion constantly. Truly innocent people worried too. Arthur seemed occupied elsewhere entirely. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple's attention drifted once more toward the broken clock. Interesting indeed. The hands remained fixed at 28 minutes to 10 exactly. Perhaps death occurred then. Perhaps not. People trusted stopped clocks far too easily. Interesting indeed. She rose quietly afterward. My dear Inspector Finch, she said gently. May I examine the study? The inspector looked doubtful but permitted it reluctantly. Interesting indeed. The study felt colder now, despite fire burning low within the grate. Sir Alfred's body had already been moved upstairs temporarily, while constables searched drawers and papers methodically. Miss Marple wandered slowly through the room, observing details carefully. The desk, the scattered documents, the window, interesting indeed. Then her eyes settled upon the carpet beneath the desk chair. A faint scratch mark. Very interesting indeed. She bent closer. The mark appeared recent, narrow indentation across polished wood floor partly concealed beneath the carpet edge. Interesting indeed. Something dragged, perhaps, or moved. Miss Marple looked thoughtfully toward the heavy grandfather clock visible through the open study doorway. Interesting indeed. Then suddenly another small detail struck her. Very small indeed. The study contained no knitting whatsoever. Interesting indeed. Why would Lydia's knitting needle break here near the clock? Unless... Ah, very interesting indeed. She returned quietly toward the drawing room afterward, where Mrs. Turner now distributed tea nervously among exhausted guests. Tea during murder investigations always fascinated Miss Marple. Human beings clung desperately to ordinary routines even while catastrophe surrounded them. Interesting indeed. Lydia accepted tea with trembling hands. Peter Wainwright spilled sugar slightly into the saucer. Arthur refused tea altogether. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves alone appeared relatively composed. Perhaps doctors grew accustomed to death professionally. Yet Miss Marple noticed something curious there also. Very interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves wore dark gloves indoors despite warm fire. Interesting indeed. Odd, perhaps. During conversation, Miss Marple addressed him gently. "You have injured your hand, Doctor?" He glanced downward briefly. "Minor cut only. Interesting indeed. How unfortunate." The doctor removed one glove reluctantly afterward, revealing bandaged palm beneath. "Broken glass last week," he explained. "Interesting indeed. Perhaps true, perhaps not." Peter Wainwright, meanwhile, appeared increasingly agitated as questioning continued through the afternoon. Finally, he burst out suddenly, "This entire business is absurd. We're trapped here because of weather while police toy with theories. Interesting indeed. Fear often disguised itself as anger." Inspector Finch looked sharply toward him. "You seem anxious, Mr. Wainwright." "I dislike murder investigations. Interesting indeed. Reasonable, perhaps." Yet Miss Marple noticed perspiration along the solicitor's forehead despite cold room. Interesting indeed. "Did Sir Alfred threaten exposing something regarding your finances?" Arthur asked quietly from across the room. Peter flushed instantly. "That is none of your concern." "Ah, very interesting indeed." Miss Lydia looked sharply between both men now. Interesting indeed. She knew something, perhaps, quite possibly many things. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple found opportunity speaking privately with Lydia near the upstairs landing while Inspector Finch questioned servants elsewhere. Snowlight filtered softly through narrow windows while the old house creaked quietly around them. "Ah, interesting indeed." "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, "you care deeply for Mr. Vale." Lydia lowered her eyes faintly. "Yes." "Interesting indeed." "And your uncle opposed the engagement." "He despised Arthur." "Interesting indeed." "Why invite him here, then?" Lydia hesitated visibly. "Uncle Alfred sent the invitation suddenly last week." Her voice lowered. "He said he wished correcting old mistakes." "Ah, very interesting indeed." "Did he explain further?" "No." "Interesting indeed." Lydia clasped the stair railing tightly. But Arthur didn't trust him. Interesting indeed. Wise, perhaps. "Why not?" "Because my uncle never apologized to anyone." "Interesting indeed. Quite revealing indeed." Then Lydia whispered something else unexpectedly. "The argument last night wasn't about the prison case." "Ah, very interesting indeed." Miss Marple looked toward her carefully. "What was it about?" Lydia swallowed faintly. "A woman. Interesting indeed. Interesting indeed." Before she could continue, footsteps approached from below and Lydia immediately fell silent. Peter Wainwright emerged into the hallway, visibly pale. "Inspector Finch wishes everyone downstairs again." Interesting indeed. Back inside the drawing room, the inspector now held several documents recovered from Sir Alfred's study desk. Financial papers, letters, legal correspondence. Interesting indeed. And among them, a newspaper clipping 12 years old concerning Arthur Vale's original trial. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch read aloud grimly. "Warehouse fire kills one-night watchman. Employee Arthur Vale convicted of negligence and theft." Silence settled heavily. Interesting indeed. Arthur stared coldly toward the clipping. "That article ruined my life." "Yes," said the inspector dryly, "which provides excellent motive." Interesting indeed. Then Miss Marple spoke softly from beside the fire. "My dear Inspector, perhaps the motive is older and more complicated than resentment alone." Inspector Finch frowned. "What do you mean?" Miss Marple folded her hands quietly. "I mean, Sir Alfred Pennington may have invited these guests together for a reason connected not merely to the past trial, but to correcting it." Silence. "Interesting indeed." Arthur looked sharply toward her for the first time. "Interesting indeed. Because yes, if Sir Alfred recently discovered something wrong about the original conviction." "Ah, very interesting indeed. Then perhaps someone inside Blackthorn Cottage feared the truth emerging at last." The woman in Kent snow remained piled heavily around Blackthorn Cottage the following morning, though pale sunlight finally began melting ice along the windowsills. Interesting indeed. The storm had passed. The danger perhaps had not. Inside the cottage, tension deepened steadily as Inspector Finch continued questioning each guest. while servants whispered nervously through shadowed corridors. Miss Marple, meanwhile, sat near the drawing-room fire, knitting calmly while appearing to notice very little. Interesting indeed. In reality, she noticed everything, especially silences, and Blackthorn Cottage contained far too many of them. Inspector Finch paced beside the mantelpiece, holding the old newspaper clipping recovered from Sir Alfred's study. The original trial remains central, he declared firmly. Mr. A Vale possessed both motive and opportunity. Interesting indeed. Arthur Vale looked almost amused now. Opportunity, he repeated quietly. You stated yourself none of us left the drawing-room? The inspector frowned. One of you must have. Interesting indeed. But no one saw anyone leave. Interesting indeed. A locked room problem, perhaps, or nearly one. The study sat only halfway down the corridor from the drawing-room. Anyone slipping away briefly during conversation might reach it unnoticed. Yet no one remembered precisely when anyone moved where. Interesting indeed. Human observation proved terribly unreliable during ordinary evenings. Miss Marple glanced toward the grandfather clock once again, still frozen stubbornly at 28 minutes to 10. Interesting indeed. Something about that clock troubled her persistently, not merely because it stopped, but because everyone accepted it too easily. Interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright suddenly spoke from near the window. Suppose Sir Alfred intended reopening the old case. Silence followed immediately. Interesting indeed. Arthur's eyes sharpened faintly. What exactly are you suggesting? The solicitor swallowed. I mean, perhaps Sir Alfred discovered new evidence. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves looked thoughtful. He did mention correcting mistakes recently. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch turned sharply. When? Several days ago. The doctor hesitated slightly. We met briefly in London. Sir Alfred seemed unusually disturbed. Interesting indeed. Disturbed by what? He didn't say. Interesting indeed. But perhaps enough. Miss Marple spoke softly. My dear Mr. Wainwright, did Sir Alfred discuss reopening the case with you directly? Peter hesitated visibly. Yes. Interesting indeed. The room tightened instantly. He asked reviewing certain legal documents from the warehouse fire, Peter admitted weakly. Arthur stepped forward slowly now. And? Peter avoided his gaze. There were irregularities. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch straightened sharply. What sort of irregularities? The solicitor rubbed trembling hands together. A witness statement disappeared during the original proceedings. Interesting indeed. Disappeared? Yes. Interesting indeed. Arthur stared coldly toward him. A statement proving my innocence, perhaps? Peter looked deeply uncomfortable now. Possibly. Silence settled heavily once more. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia whispered faintly, Uncle Alfred knew? Peter nodded weakly. He discovered it only recently while sorting old papers. Interesting indeed. And who removed the statement originally? Asked Inspector Finch sharply. Peter said nothing immediately. Interesting indeed. Then quietly, Sir Alfred believed someone inside the warehouse company bribed court officials. Ah, very interesting indeed. Money again. Corruption, perhaps. The inspector frowned deeply. And the missing witness? Peter swallowed. A woman named Eleanor Marsh. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple's knitting needles paused softly. Interesting indeed. Because names mattered greatly, especially forgotten names. Arthur Vale spoke quietly now. She worked bookkeeping at the warehouse. Interesting indeed. You knew her well? A pause? Yes. Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia looked suddenly toward Arthur, then quickly away. Ah, very interesting indeed. The woman in Kent, then. Not merely random witness, perhaps. The inspector continued. What became of Miss Marsh? Arthur's expression darkened faintly. She vanished shortly after the trial. Interesting indeed. No one vanished accidentally, usually. Peter Wainwright added reluctantly. Sir Alfred hired investigators last month attempting to locate her. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple leaned back thoughtfully. There it was, perhaps. Not merely guilt regarding wrongful conviction. Something else. If Eleanor Marsh disappeared after the trial, very interesting indeed. Someone feared what she knew. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple wandered quietly through Blackthorn Cottage, while Inspector Finch organised further searches. Interesting indeed. Old houses often preserved clues better than people did. The corridor outside the study remained dim and narrow beneath dark oak panels polished by generations of careful servants. Snowlight filtered faintly through tall windows overlooking frozen gardens. Beautiful, perhaps, and lonely. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple paused beside the grandfather clock once again, then very carefully examined the mechanism through its glass front. Interesting indeed. A tiny splinter of silver remained lodged near the pendulum wheel. Ah, very interesting indeed. Knitting needle. Not dropped accidentally, then. Broken inside the clock itself. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple smiled faintly, because yes. Now something became clearer indeed. The clock had not broken naturally, someone deliberately stopped it, and unlikely after Sir Alfred's death rather than before. Interesting indeed. Which meant the time displayed might be false entirely. Ah, very interesting indeed. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Arthur Vale. Interesting indeed. "You've solved something," he observed quietly. Miss Marple smiled gently. "Only small pieces. Interesting indeed." Arthur leaned against the wall nearby, looking unusually tired now. "Inspector Finch believes I killed him." "Yes." "Interesting indeed." "You disagree?" Not a question, perhaps. Miss Marple regarded him carefully. "My dear Mr. Vale, guilty men often wish convincing others quickly. You seem more interested discovering why Sir Alfred invited you here." "Interesting indeed." Arthur looked toward the snow-covered gardens beyond the window. "Ah, for 12 years I imagined confronting him." His voice remained calm, though strained faintly beneath. "But last night he looked frightened." "Ah, very interesting indeed." "Frightened of what?" Arthur hesitated. "I think someone was blackmailing him." "Interesting indeed." "Did he say so?" "No." "Interesting indeed. But," Arthur lowered his voice slightly, "before dinner I overheard him arguing with Peter Wainwright inside the study." "Interesting indeed." "What about?" "Money." Arthur paused carefully. "And a woman named Eleanor." "Ah, very interesting indeed." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened faintly. "Did Mr. Wainwright know Eleanor Marsh?" "Yes." "Interesting indeed." "Very well, perhaps." There it was then. Interesting indeed. Before Miss Marple could continue further, raised voices sounded suddenly from upstairs. Inspector Finch shouting sharply. Peter Wainwright protesting. Interesting indeed. They hurried immediately toward the commotion where the inspector now stood outside Peter's bedroom, holding several burned paper fragments recovered from the fireplace grate. Interesting indeed. The solicitor looked pale as death itself. "What are these?" Finch demanded sharply. Peter stammered weakly. "Old correspondence." "Interesting indeed." The inspector examined one surviving fragment carefully, then looked sharply upward. "Eleanor Marsh." Silence crashed heavily through the hallway. Interesting indeed. Because yes, Peter Wainwright knew the missing witness far better than he admitted. The witness who vanished. Peter Wainwright collapsed into a chair as though his legs no longer trusted him. Interesting indeed. The burned fragments trembled visibly in Inspector Finch's hand while the narrow upstairs hallway seemed suddenly too small for breathing comfortably. "Explain this," Finch demanded sharply. Peter removed spectacles weakly. "It's not what you think." Interesting indeed. People almost always said that immediately before confirming exactly what one thought. The inspector held up the half-burned paper fragment again. Though much destroyed, several words remained legible. "Could not testify after what Alfred threatened, and Arthur never knew." Interesting indeed. Very interesting indeed. Arthur Vale stood motionless near the landing railing now, face drained entirely of colour. "Eleanor Marsh wrote those letters?" Peter closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." Interesting indeed. Miss Lydia whispered faintly. "She was alive all these years?" "Ah, very interesting indeed." Peter nodded miserably. Inspector Finch crossed his arms grimly. "Where is she now?" Silence. Interesting indeed. Too long. Then quietly. "Dead." Interesting indeed. Not surprising, perhaps. Still important. "How?" Finch pressed sharply. "She died 3 years ago." Interesting indeed. Natural causes? Yes. Interesting indeed. Perhaps true, perhaps not. Miss Marple watched Peter carefully. His fear seemed genuine, certainly, but not fear of murder accusation exactly. Fear of exposure, perhaps. Interesting indeed. Arthur spoke softly now. You knew where Eleanor was the entire time. Peter looked toward him painfully. Yes. Interesting indeed. And you said nothing while I went prison? Silence again. Interesting indeed. Then Peter whispered, I loved her. Ah, very interesting indeed. Miss Lydia lowered her eyes faintly. The pieces shifted suddenly then. Not merely corruption, perhaps. Human weakness again. Peter continued shakily. Eleanor became frightened after the trial. She believed powerful people wanted silence. His hands trembled visibly now. Sir Alfred convinced her testifying further would ruin everyone involved. Interesting indeed. Ruin whom? Asked Miss Marple softly. Peter hesitated. Then, Sir Alfred himself. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch frowned sharply. Explain properly. Peter swallowed hard. Sir Alfred learned evidence against Arthur Vale was unreliable before sentencing. His voice weakened faintly. But by then newspapers already sensationalized the case. Public pressure became enormous. Interesting indeed. Human vanity, perhaps. Professional pride. He feared appearing weak if conviction collapsed, Peter whispered, so he ignored Eleanor's revised testimony. Silence settled heavily. Interesting indeed. Arthur stared toward him with terrible stillness now. You're saying he knowingly sentenced an innocent man? Peter lowered his head. Yes. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple felt sadness then rather than surprise. People built entire lives protecting pride from humiliation. Even judges, especially judges perhaps. Inspector Finch paced slowly across the landing. So, Sir Alfred later regretted this. Yes. Interesting indeed. And recently intended correcting matters? Peter nodded faintly. He contacted Eleanor again several weeks ago. Ah, very interesting indeed. Why? He wanted written confession prepared officially before announcing the truth publicly. Interesting indeed. Arthur's expression hardened bitterly. 12 years too late. Quite so indeed. Inspector Finch looked sharply toward Peter. Why burn the letters? Fear crossed the solicitor's face again immediately. Interesting indeed. Because if newspapers learned the truth, Sir Alfred's reputation would be destroyed. Interesting indeed. Still protecting the dead man, then? Or perhaps protecting himself, too? Miss Marple spoke gently. My dear Mr. Wainwright, you argued violently with Sir Alfred last night, didn't you? Peter rubbed exhausted eyes. Yes. Interesting indeed. He insisted announcing everything immediately. Peter laughed weakly. I told him scandal would consume the entire village. Interesting indeed. And afterward? He ordered me leave the study. Interesting indeed. What time? Peter hesitated faintly. Approximately 9:20. Interesting indeed. Interesting indeed. Which already conflicted subtly with the stopped clock suggesting death nearly 10 minutes later. Ah, very interesting indeed. Miss Marple's thoughts returned immediately toward the broken knitting needle lodged inside the clock mechanism. Someone falsified the time, but why? To create opportunity, perhaps, or conceal it. Interesting indeed. Later that evening, Miss Marple sat privately with Lydia Pennington beside the drawing-room fire while others scattered uneasily throughout the cottage. The atmosphere inside Blackthorn Cottage had changed entirely now. No longer merely suspicion. Something sadder. Interesting indeed. A wrongful conviction carried enormous weight once exposed. Lydia stared silently into the flames. Uncle Alfred ruined Arthur's life. Yes. Interesting indeed. And now he's dead before admitting it publicly. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple watched her carefully. You still intended marrying Mr. Vale despite everything? Lydia smiled faintly, though tears glimmered behind her eyes. Yes. Interesting indeed. Even after prison? Yes. Immediate answer. Entirely genuine. Interesting indeed. Love, perhaps. Or loyalty. Rare either way. Miss Marple folded knitting softly. My dear, Did Sir Alfred know about your engagement before inviting Arthur here? Yes. Interesting indeed. And his reaction? He was furious initially. Lydia paused, then suddenly changed. Ah, very interesting indeed. Changed how? He said perhaps Arthur deserved second chance. Interesting indeed. Not likely from kindness alone, perhaps. Guilt often disguised itself eventually as generosity. Lydia lowered her voice slightly. I think Uncle Alfred was afraid dying before fixing what he'd done. Interesting indeed. A conscience delayed 12 years, perhaps finally awakening. Then unexpectedly Lydia whispered, There's something else. Ah, very interesting indeed. What is it? Lydia hesitated visibly. Last night, before dinner, I saw Uncle Alfred place something inside the grandfather clock. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple's knitting paused completely. Very interesting indeed. Something small? Yes. Did you see what? No. Interesting indeed. But afterward he locked the clock cabinet. Ah, very interesting indeed. Now matters shifted once more. The clock perhaps concealed something important. Documents, perhaps. Evidence. Interesting indeed. Before Miss Marple could question further, footsteps approached rapidly through corridor. Dr. Julian Reeves entered, looking troubled. Inspector Finch wishes everyone downstairs immediately. Interesting indeed. Again. Inside the study, the inspector stood beside Sir Alfred's desk, holding small brass key recovered from the victim's coat pocket. Interesting indeed. The clock key, he announced grimly. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch crossed toward the grandfather clock in the hallway while everyone followed silently. Snowlight filtered pale and cold through nearby windows as the inspector unlocked the clock cabinet carefully. Inside, hidden behind the pendulum compartment, a sealed envelope. Interesting indeed. The inspector removed it slowly. Written across the front in Sir Alfred Pennington's firm handwriting were several words only. To be opened if anything happens to me. Silence crashed across the hallway. Interesting indeed. Very interesting indeed. The letter inside the clock. No one spoke while Inspector Finch opened the envelope. Interesting indeed. The hallway outside the study seemed unnaturally quiet beneath pale winter light, while snow reflected cold brightness through narrow windows. Even the servants lingered silently at distant doorways watching. A dead magistrate, a hidden letter, a wrongful conviction. Ashcombe had not witnessed such scandal in decades. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch unfolded the papers carefully. Several handwritten pages, one signed statement, and beneath them, a photograph. Interesting indeed. Arthur Vale stared sharply toward it at once. Eleanor! Ah, very interesting indeed. The photograph showed young woman standing beside textile warehouse gates many years earlier, dark-haired and serious-faced, one hand resting lightly upon ledger books. Interesting indeed. Ordinary, perhaps, yet people rarely preserved photographs without emotional reason. Inspector Finch began reading Sir Alfred's letter aloud. If this document is being read, then I have either lost courage or lost opportunity. 12 years ago, I knowingly allowed an innocent man to be convicted. Silence deepened heavily. Interesting indeed. Lydia lowered her eyes while Peter Wainwright looked physically ill. Inspector Finch continued grimly. Eleanor Marsh informed me before sentencing that warehouse inventory records had been altered after the fire. The theft was committed not by Arthur Vale but by another employee protected through family connections. Interesting indeed. Arthur remained utterly motionless now. The inspector turned next page. I intended confessing publicly this evening and arranging formal pardon proceedings. I also intended revealing the name of the actual thief. Ah, very interesting indeed. Everyone looked upward sharply. Because yes, there it was perhaps. The reason for murder. Inspector Finch frowned. The next page is missing. Silence. Interesting indeed. Only torn edge remained where final sheet once attached. Someone removed it recently. Very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch looked sharply around the group. The missing page likely contained the killer's name. Interesting indeed. Simple conclusion, perhaps. Possibly too simple. Arthur finally spoke quietly. Whoever killed Sir Alfred took that page. Yes, said Finch grimly. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple, meanwhile, considered something else entirely. Why hide confession inside clock? Why not keep it locked safely in desk? Interesting indeed. Because perhaps Sir Alfred feared someone searching the study specifically. Someone already aware of the documents. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch resumed examination of the envelope contents. Inside remained one additional item unnoticed initially, a railway ticket stub. Very interesting indeed. Dated 3 weeks earlier. Destination, Canterbury. Interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright visibly paled at once. Miss Marple noticed immediately. Interesting indeed. "My dear Mr. Wainwright," she said softly, "you recognise the ticket, perhaps?" Peter swallowed faintly. "Yes." "Interesting indeed." "Why?" "I accompanied Sir Alfred." "Ah, very interesting indeed." "To visit Eleanor Marsh?" asked Inspector Finch sharply. "Yes." "Interesting indeed." The solicitor removed spectacles tiredly. "She lived under another name in Canterbury for years." He hesitated painfully. Sir Alfred wished persuading her provide formal statement. Interesting indeed. And did she agree? No. Interesting indeed. Why not? Peter looked toward Arthur briefly. She believed reopening everything would only destroy more lives. Interesting indeed. Poor Eleanor, perhaps. Another person exhausted by old guilt. Inspector Finch frowned thoughtfully. When exactly did she die? 3 years ago. Interesting indeed. Then Sir Alfred visited dead woman's house? Peter nodded weakly. To retrieve her letters and statement. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch's eyes narrowed. So the confession letter inside the clock was prepared after Eleanor's death? Yes. Interesting indeed. Meaning Sir Alfred spent years privately aware of Arthur's innocence before acting publicly. Guilt delayed perhaps by cowardice. Interesting indeed. Arthur laughed softly then, not pleasant laughter. 12 years destroyed because a judge feared embarrassment. Interesting indeed. No one contradicted him, because no contradiction existed. Later that afternoon, Inspector Finch organised another reconstruction of the previous evening. Interesting indeed. Everyone gathered once more inside the drawing room while snow drifted silently outside. The inspector pointed toward each chair carefully. Miss Lydia seated near piano, Dr. Reeves beside fireplace, Mr. Veil by window. He turned sharply toward Peter Wainwright. And you? Near the drinks cabinet. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred remained in study after approximately 9:20, Finch continued. The clock stopped at 28 minutes to 10. Interesting indeed. Arthur folded arms calmly. Assuming the clock accurate. Silence. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch frowned. What do you mean? Miss Marple spoke gently before Arthur could continue. The knitting needle? Interesting indeed. Everyone looked toward her. My dear Inspector, the needle fragment lodged inside the mechanism intentionally stopped the clock. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch blinked. You're certain? Yes. Interesting indeed. Then time of death may be false. Precisely. Interesting indeed. The inspector stared toward the clock uneasily now. So someone tampered with it after murder? Yes. Interesting indeed. But why? Miss Marple smiled faintly. To simplify matters, perhaps. Interesting indeed. People creating false timelines usually hoped police would stop thinking afterward. Inspector Finch paced slowly. If death occurred earlier than 9:30, he stopped suddenly, then one of you might have entered study before gathering fully together. Ah, very interesting indeed. New possibilities opened immediately. Peter Wainwright looked alarmed again. Dr. Reeves thoughtful. Lydia frightened. Arthur alone remained calm. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple meanwhile noticed another curious thing entirely. Very curious indeed. The grandfather clock stood several feet from the study entrance. Interesting indeed. To tamper with it after murder, someone required opportunity standing alone in hallway. Yet everyone supposedly remained together after dinner. Interesting indeed. Unless, very interesting indeed, unless the clock was tampered with before the body discovered rather than afterward, meaning the killer planned false timeline in advance. Very interesting indeed. That evening Miss Marple wandered quietly upstairs, unable to sleep. while wind whispered faintly around the old cottage. Interesting indeed. Halfway along corridor, she noticed light beneath one bedroom door. Peter Wainwright's room. Interesting indeed. Voices emerged softly from inside. Peter speaking urgently. And another voice. Lydia Pennington. Very interesting indeed. Miss Marple paused silently near the hallway corner. Peter sounded deeply distressed. You should have told me sooner. Interesting indeed. Lydia answered shakily. I was frightened. Interesting indeed. Does Arthur know? No. Silence followed briefly. Then Peter whispered words that made Miss Marple stop completely still. If Sir Alfred discovered the truth about the baby, everything changes. Ah, very interesting indeed. The child no one mentioned. Miss Marple remained very still in the darkened hallway. Interesting indeed. Inside Peter Wainwright's room, silence followed his final words heavily. The baby. Ah, yes, very interesting indeed. Human beings concealed many things for money or pride, but children born under scandalous circumstances often produced the deepest secrecy of all. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple moved quietly away before either occupant noticed her presence. Eavesdropping deliberately was improper certainly, yet accidental overhearing occasionally proved useful. Interesting indeed. By morning, Blackthorn Cottage felt colder despite roaring fires throughout the house. Snow still surrounded the isolated property, though village men had finally cleared partial road access overnight. No one left. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch insisted everyone remain available until further notice, while constables searched the grounds repeatedly for the missing page from Sir Alfred's confession. Nothing emerged. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple sat near the breakfast table, buttering toast delicately, while observing the strained silence among guests. Peter Wainwright looked exhausted, Lydia pale and distracted, Dr. Reeves thoughtful as ever. Arthur Vale alone appeared oddly calm. Interesting indeed. Perhaps after 12 years of injustice, one more disaster scarcely mattered. Inspector Finch entered carrying fresh notes and immediately addressed the room. I've received additional information from Kent Police. Interesting indeed. Everyone looked up sharply. The inspector unfolded papers carefully. Eleanor Marsh gave birth to a child approximately 11 years ago. Silence crashed through the breakfast room. Very interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright closed his eyes briefly. Lydia visibly stiffened. Arthur stared toward the inspector without expression. Interesting indeed. A son? Miss Marple asked gently. A daughter, Finch replied. Interesting indeed. And the child's father? The inspector glanced toward Arthur. Unknown officially. Interesting indeed, but perhaps not unknown privately. Arthur spoke quietly after several moments. I never knew Eleanor had a child. Interesting indeed. His shock appeared genuine. Miss Marple believed it entirely. Inspector Finch continued grimly. The child died young from illness. Interesting indeed. A strange sadness passed briefly across the room then, because even amid murder investigations, dead children altered atmospheres completely. Lydia lowered her eyes faintly. Peter Wainwright stared silently toward his untouched tea. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple watched him carefully. Far too much grief there for distant acquaintance merely. Very interesting indeed. The inspector folded papers sharply. Sir Alfred apparently learned about the child shortly before his death. Very interesting indeed. And, Arthur asked quietly, he considered it further proof the original conviction destroyed innocent lives. Interesting indeed. Yes, perhaps. A prison sentence rarely punished one person alone. It spread outward, destroying futures quietly. Inspector Finch turned toward Peter Wainwright now. You visited Eleanor frequently in Canterbury, didn't you? Peter hesitated. Yes, interesting indeed. As friend? A pause, then softly, I loved her. Interesting indeed. There it was, finally spoken plainly. Arthur looked toward him sharply now. You? Interesting indeed. Peter nodded miserably. She came to me after the trial frightened and desperate. His voice trembled faintly. Sir Alfred wanted silence. Newspapers wanted scandal. You disappeared into prison. He swallowed hard. I tried helping her. Interesting indeed. And the child? Asked Miss Marple gently. Peter looked downward. She was mine. Silence settled across the breakfast room once more. Very interesting indeed. Lydia covered her mouth softly. Arthur remained still for several moments before speaking quietly. So, Eleanor loved you? Peter laughed bitterly. No. He rubbed tired eyes. She loved you. Interesting indeed. Ah, quite tragic indeed. She believed if she spoke publicly after sentencing, perhaps your conviction would still collapse. Peter's voice weakened. But Sir Alfred frightened her, said scandal would destroy all of us. Interesting indeed. Fear again, respectability again. Always dangerous indeed. Inspector Finch crossed his arms. And now, Sir Alfred intended exposing the truth finally. Yes. Interesting indeed. Peter looked genuinely broken now. All those years Eleanor lived quietly under another name while I supported her secretly. He swallowed painfully. Then she died before seeing Arthur cleared. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple felt profound sadness then. Not melodramatic tragedy, perhaps. Ordinary tragedy, which was usually worse. Later that afternoon Miss Marple wandered into the study once more while snowlight faded slowly beyond frosted windows. Interesting indeed. The room still carried unpleasant heaviness despite removal of the body. Sir Alfred's desk remained cluttered with legal papers and correspondence, while the faint scratch mark near the carpet edge continued troubling her thoughts. Interesting indeed. Something moved. But what? She crossed slowly toward the bookshelves lining one wall. Interesting indeed. Old legal volumes mostly. Criminal records. Hall for court transcripts. Then suddenly her eyes settled upon a framed photograph near the mantelpiece. A younger Sir Alfred standing beside another man outside courthouse steps many years earlier. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple lifted the photograph carefully. The second man wore judicial robes also, and beneath the frame, Justice Edwin Reeves, 1978 R. Very interesting indeed. Reeves. Dr. Julian Reeves. Interesting indeed. The doctor's father, perhaps. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Very interesting indeed. Because yes, Dr. Reeves knew Sir Alfred long before this weekend, perhaps. Not merely professional acquaintance from London. Family connection. Interesting indeed. Footsteps sounded quietly behind her. Dr. Reeves himself. Interesting indeed. You found my father, he said calmly. Miss Marple turned gently. You resemble him somewhat. The doctor smiled faintly. Unfortunately. Interesting indeed. There was strain beneath the remark, perhaps. Miss Marple studied him quietly. Your father worked closely with Sir Alfred? Yes. Interesting indeed. For years. The doctor crossed slowly toward the fireplace. My father helped oversee Arthur Vale's original case. Very interesting indeed. Another connection. Did he believe Arthur guilty? Miss Marple asked softly. Dr. Reeves hesitated visibly. No. Interesting indeed. And Sir Alfred knew this? Yes. Interesting indeed. The doctor looked toward the snow-covered window thoughtfully. My father argued fiercely against the conviction privately. He paused carefully. It damaged their friendship permanently. Interesting indeed. Then softly, my father died believing an innocent man went prison because neither judge possessed courage, admitting uncertainty publicly. Very interesting indeed. Cowardice again, perhaps. Not cruelty entirely, though consequences remained equally terrible. Miss Marple regarded him thoughtfully. You accepted Sir Alfred's invitation because of the old case? Yes. Interesting indeed. And because he intended confessing publicly? The doctor looked surprised briefly. Yes. Interesting indeed. There it was then. Everyone invited to Blackthorn Cottage connected directly to the original injustice somehow. Arthur the victim, Peter the secret lover, Lydia the loyal niece, Dr. Reeves representing his dead father's conscience, and Sir Alfred perhaps hoping redemption possible at last. Interesting indeed. Then why murder him before confession? Ah, because perhaps redemption threatened someone more than silence did. The thing hidden beneath the floorboards. That evening the snow began falling once more. Interesting indeed. Not the violent storm of previous nights perhaps, but a quieter, steadier snowfall that wrapped Blackthorn Cottage in muffled silence. Inside the drawing room, lamps glowed softly, while unease settled heavier than ever across the isolated house. Inspector Finch remained increasingly frustrated. Interesting indeed. Too many motives now, too many secrets, and still no clear murderer. Arthur Vale possessed resentment. Peter Wainwright possessed hidden history. Lydia possessed inheritance concerns. Dr. Reeves possessed old family grievances. Interesting indeed. Almost everyone inside Blackthorn Cottage carried reason wishing Sir Alfred Pennington silent. Yet Miss Marple continued feeling the truth rested not in dramatic emotions, but smaller practical details. The clock, the knitting needle, the scratch mark upon the study floor. Interesting indeed. Especially the scratch mark. After dinner, Miss Marple requested another look inside the study, while Inspector Finch reluctantly accompanied her. The room appeared unchanged beneath warm lamplight and heavy shadows. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple crossed directly toward the faint mark beside the desk carpet once more. Then quite unexpectedly she knelt carefully upon the floor. Inspector Finch blinked. "My dear lady, what exactly are you searching for?" "Human untidiness," Miss Marple replied gently. "Interesting indeed, because yes. People rarely cleaned perfectly during panic." Miss Marple lifted the carpet edge slowly. Beneath it, one floorboard showed fresher polish than surrounding wood. "Ah, very interesting indeed." Inspector Finch crouched immediately beside her. "A hidden compartment? Possibly. Interesting indeed." The inspector summoned constable assistants quickly, and within minutes they carefully pried the loose board upward. Underneath rested a narrow metal box coated lightly with dust. Interesting indeed. Hidden long ago, perhaps, or recently. Inspector Finch opened it carefully. Inside lay several documents tied neatly with faded blue ribbon, and beneath them, a revolver. Interesting indeed. Unused recently by appearance, yet hidden deliberately. The inspector examined the papers first. Warehouse inventory ledgers. Very interesting indeed. Miss Marple leaned slightly closer. Several entries showed alterations in different handwriting. Interesting indeed. Numbers changed, shipments erased, medical inventory missing. Proof. The original theft from 12 years earlier. Inspector Finch's eyes sharpened immediately. These records clear Arthur Vale completely. Interesting indeed. Yes, perhaps, but more importantly they identified the real thief. The inspector turned final page slowly, then stopped. Interesting indeed. A single name appeared repeatedly beside altered signatures. Julian Reeves. Silence settled heavily across the study. Very interesting indeed. Dr. Julian Reeves. Not merely connected through his father after all. Connected directly. Inspector Finch stared downward in disbelief. The doctor. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple remained very still, because yes, now certain things shifted abruptly into terrible clarity. The London physician invited to witness Sir Alfred's public confession, the son of a judge involved in the original trial, and secretly connected to the theft itself. Very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch rose sharply. "Fetch Dr. Reeves immediately." Minutes later, everyone gathered once more inside the drawing room, where snow whispered softly against dark windows. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch placed the ledgers heavily upon the table. Dr. Reeves looked toward them calmly initially. Then all colour left his face. "Ah, very interesting indeed." "You recognise these?" Finch demanded sharply. The doctor remained silent several moments. Then quietly, "Yes." "Interesting indeed." Arthur Vale stared at him in disbelief. "You?" Dr. Reeves lowered tired eyes. "My father covered the theft originally." Silence crashed heavily through the room. "Interesting indeed." Inspector Finch frowned sharply. "Explain properly." The doctor spoke with strange exhausted calmness now. "I was young then, newly qualified. The warehouse company funded part of my medical training through private investments," he swallowed faintly. "The theft began gradually." "Interesting indeed." "Medicine shipments sold illegally," Miss Marple murmured softly. "Yes." "Interesting indeed." Arthur stepped forward slowly. "And I went prison for it." Dr. Reeves looked toward him painfully. "My father discovered irregularities after the fire." He paused. But by then Sir Alfred already pushed conviction publicly. Interesting indeed. And your father stayed silent? Yes. Interesting indeed. Cowardice once again. Always cowardice, perhaps. The doctor rubbed shaking hands together. He believed exposing the truth would destroy both our lives. His voice weakened faintly. He forced me leave England temporarily afterward. Interesting indeed. And Eleanor Marsh knew? Asked Miss Marple gently. Yes. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred recently uncovered everything finally. Dr. Reeves nodded faintly. He summoned me here intending public confession. Ah, very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch's voice hardened. So you murdered him before he could expose you. Silence followed. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves looked strangely calm now. No. Interesting indeed. Not denial exactly, perhaps, but not confession either. Inspector Finch stepped closer sharply. The evidence places you directly inside the original crime. Yes. Interesting indeed. And Sir Alfred intended revealing your name. Yes. Interesting indeed. Then you possess strongest motive of anyone here. The doctor gave faint bitter smile. Perhaps. Interesting indeed. Yet Miss Marple watched him carefully. Something still wrong. Very wrong indeed. Because although Dr. Reeves clearly hid terrible truths, the murder itself still felt oddly inconsistent. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple spoke softly. My dear doctor, why hide these ledgers beneath the floorboards? Dr. Reeves blinked faintly. I didn't. Very interesting indeed. Inspector Finch frowned sharply. You expect us believing someone else concealed evidence incriminating you? Yes. Interesting indeed. The doctor looked genuinely confused now. Miss Marple's thoughts moved rapidly. The scratch mark, the moved carpet, the hidden box. Interesting indeed. Someone recently accessed the compartment, but if Dr. Reeves intended concealing guilt, why leave records intact identifying himself so clearly? Interesting indeed. Too obvious, perhaps. Far too obvious. Then suddenly Miss Marple remembered another detail. Very small indeed. Dr. Reeves's injured hand. Interesting indeed. A cut supposedly from broken glass, yet no one asked which hand wielded the murder weapon. Ah, very interesting indeed. The wrong man again. Inspector Finch's attention shifted instantly toward Dr. Reeves's bandaged hand. Interesting indeed. The drawing room fell silent beneath the steady ticking of smaller mantel clocks, while snow whispered softly outside the dark windows. You injured yourself during the murder? Finch demanded sharply. Dr. Reeves looked downward briefly. No. Interesting indeed. The inspector stepped closer. Then how? While unpacking medical instruments before travelling here. Interesting indeed. Perhaps true, perhaps not. Yet Miss Marple remained unconvinced of something deeper entirely. Dr. Reeves certainly carried guilt regarding the old theft. That much now appeared undeniable. But murder? Interesting indeed. Not impossible, perhaps. Still somehow unsatisfactory. Arthur Vale stared coldly toward the doctor. You allowed me imprisoned for 12 years. Yes. Interesting indeed. No excuses offered. Interesting indeed. Dr. Reeves spoke quietly now. My father insisted silence protected our family. He swallowed faintly. I obeyed him. Interesting indeed. Cowardice inherited, perhaps. And now Sir Alfred intended exposing you publicly, Inspector Finch pressed. Convenient reason for murder. The doctor looked exhausted suddenly. I did not kill him. Interesting indeed. Again, not dramatic, not defensive enough, perhaps. Miss Marple folded knitting thoughtfully. Because yes, if Dr. Reeves murdered Sir Alfred, several details still made little sense. Why tamper with the clock so crudely? Why leave hidden ledgers beneath loose floorboards? Why remain at Blackthorn Cottage afterward surrounded by witnesses? Interesting indeed. No, something remained missing. Later that evening, Inspector Finch ordered Dr. Reeves confined informally to his room pending further investigation. Interesting indeed. Not formal arrest yet, but close. Arthur Vale wandered afterward into the study alone while Miss Marple quietly followed several minutes later. The room glowed softly beneath desk lamplight while snow reflected pale silver through the windows. Arthur stood near the fireplace staring downward toward the loose floorboard compartment now left open. Interesting indeed. You don't believe the doctor killed him, he said quietly without turning. Interesting indeed. Not a question, perhaps. Miss Marple seated herself gently near the desk. No. Interesting indeed. Arthur looked toward her sharply. Even after the ledgers? My dear Mr. Vale, guilt and murder are related sometimes, but not always. Interesting indeed. Arthur smiled faintly, though bitterness remained beneath it. I spent years learning that lesson. Quite understandable indeed. Miss Marple observed him carefully. You hated Sir Alfred? Yes. Interesting indeed. Thus so, but not enough? Arthur looked toward the snowy darkness outside. For years I dreamed confronting him. His voice remained calm. Then last night I saw an old frightened man preparing to admit what he'd done. He paused faintly. Strangely, hatred disappeared. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple believed him. Because yes, real vengeance rarely resembled dramatic fantasies once opportunity actually arrived. Then Arthur said quietly, There's something no one asked me. Very interesting indeed. What is that? I wasn't the only person Eleanor Marsh loved. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple watched him carefully. Peter Wainwright told you she loved you. Yes. Arthur shook his head faintly. But that wasn't true. Very interesting indeed. Who did she love? Arthur hesitated briefly. Sir Alfred. Silence settled heavily through the study. Very interesting indeed. Miss Marple remained perfectly still, because suddenly several impossible emotions became terribly possible indeed. Arthur continued softly. She admired him before the trial, trusted him completely. His expression darkened faintly. When he ignored her revised statement, it destroyed her. Interesting indeed. Poor Eleanor, perhaps. Not merely frightened witness then, a woman betrayed by the very man she trusted most. She wrote him constantly afterward, Arthur said quietly. Letters full of anger and regret. Interesting indeed. And Peter Wainwright knew this? Yes. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple's thoughts shifted rapidly now. Peter loved Eleanor. Eleanor loved Sir Alfred. Sir Alfred destroyed Arthur. Dr. Reeves concealed theft. Interesting indeed. Human relationships rarely arrange themselves neatly. Then another thought struck suddenly. Very suddenly indeed. If Sir Alfred knew Eleanor loved him, interesting indeed. Perhaps guilt toward Arthur wasn't the only reason he reopened the case. Perhaps he carried personal guilt toward Eleanor also. Very interesting indeed. Footsteps sounded sharply outside the study then. Inspector Finch entered looking grim. We've found something else. Interesting indeed. He held small folded page carefully between gloved fingers. The missing final page from Sir Alfred's confession. Very interesting indeed. Where was it? Miss Marple asked softly. Inside the kitchen stove. Interesting indeed. Partially burned, perhaps, but not destroyed completely. Inspector Finch unfolded the damaged paper carefully upon the desk. The lower section remained charred beyond reading, but several lines survived clearly enough. I alone bear responsibility for allowing fear and vanity to corrupt justice. Interesting indeed. Further below, the person responsible for altering warehouse records was Julian Reeves, though his father persuaded me silence would preserve innocent lives. Interesting indeed. Then final surviving line. I invited everyone here because I intended asking forgiveness before. The rest vanished into blackened edges. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch frowned. The page confirms Reeves's involvement directly. Yes, Miss Marple said softly. Interesting indeed. But not murder. The inspector looked impatient. My dear lady, how many guilty secrets require before accepting obvious solution? Interesting indeed. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Several more, perhaps. Interesting indeed. Because something still troubled her profoundly. The clock, the knitting needle, and most importantly, the timing. Interesting indeed. Everyone assumed Sir Alfred died after 9:30 because of the stopped clock, but if the clock deliberately falsified... very interesting indeed. Then perhaps Sir Alfred died much earlier than anyone realised, before the guests fully gathered together perhaps, before certain conversations even occurred. Interesting indeed. And if so... Someone's alibi might collapse entirely. The hour that never happened. Miss Marple slept very little that night. Interesting indeed. The wind had quieted at last outside Blackthorn Cottage, but her thoughts had not. While the house settled and creaked softly beneath winter darkness, the pieces of the puzzle continued arranging themselves slowly inside her mind. The broken clock, the knitting needle, the moved carpet, the hidden ledgers, and above all, the impossible timeline. Interesting indeed, because yes, everyone inside Blackthorn Cottage relied upon the stopped grandfather clock. 28 minutes to 10, a convenient hour, a believable hour, and entirely false perhaps. Miss Marple sat upright suddenly beside her bedroom fire. Very interesting indeed. Something tiny returned to her memory then. Peter Wainwright's words. Sir Alfred ordered him from the study around 9:20. Interesting indeed. Yet afterwards several people distinctly remembered Sir Alfred still alive later, or believed they did. Ah, believed. Interesting indeed. Voices heard through doors, movements assumed, shadows crossing hallways. Human beings often convince themselves they witness things never actually observed directly. By morning, Miss Marple requested everyone gather once more inside the drawing room, before Inspector Finch prepared formal charges against Dr. Reeves. Interesting indeed. The atmosphere felt exhausted now. Snowlight drifted pale through windows while untouched breakfast trays lingered forgotten beside cold fireplaces. Arthur Vale stood near the window silently. Lydia sat pale beside the piano. Peter Wainwright looked near collapse entirely. Dr. Reeves alone appeared strangely calm. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch crossed his arms impatiently. Well? Miss Marple folded her hands quietly. My dear Inspector, I believe Sir Alfred Pennington died considerably earlier than everyone assumed. Silence settled immediately. Interesting indeed. The clock was tampered with, she continued gently. The knitting needle lodged inside its mechanism stopped the hands deliberately. Inspector Finch nodded shortly. We already established that. Yes, said Miss Marple softly, but not why. Interesting indeed. She rose slowly and crossed toward the grandfather clock standing silent beside the hallway entrance. Whoever stopped this clock wished establishing a false time of death. She touched the wooden case lightly. Which means the murderer needed everyone believing Sir Alfred alive later than he truly was. Interesting indeed. Arthur frowned thoughtfully. Then when did he actually die? Miss Marple looked toward Peter Wainwright quietly. Shortly after your argument, perhaps. Peter stared at her. Before 9:30? Yes. Interesting indeed. Shock moved visibly across the room. Inspector Finch frowned sharply. That's impossible. Several people heard Sir Alfred afterward. Did they? Miss Marple asked gently. Interesting indeed. Silence followed. Very interesting indeed. She continued softly. My dear friends, no one actually saw Sir Alfred alive after Mr. Wainwright left the study. Ah, very interesting indeed. Lydia blinked faintly. But we heard voices. Yes. Interesting indeed. Whose voices? Silence again. Miss Marple smiled sadly. Only one voice, clearly, perhaps. Arthur looked sharply upward. Peter's? Interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright went completely pale. Inspector Finch turned instantly. What does that mean? Miss Marple's voice remained calm. It means Mr. Wainwright continued speaking loudly outside the study afterward, or creating impression Sir Alfred remained inside answering him. Very interesting indeed. Peter shook his head weakly. No. But the denial lacked strength entirely. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple continued gently. Then later, during confusion in the drawing room, someone stopped the grandfather clock using Lydia's knitting needle. She looked directly toward Peter now. You, I believe. Silence crashed across the room. Very interesting indeed. Peter Wainwright's hands trembled visibly. Inspector Finch stepped forward sharply. You killed Sir Alfred? Peter lowered his head slowly. Yes. Interesting indeed. No protest, no collapse, only exhausted surrender at last. Lydia whispered brokenly, Why? Peter laughed faintly then, though tears filled his eyes. Because he ruined everything. Interesting indeed. There it was, perhaps. Not rage alone. Years of bitterness quietly rotting beneath civility. Arthur stared coldly toward him. You loved Eleanor? Yes. Interesting indeed. Peter's voice weakened. She spent years broken because of him, hiding, afraid, watching her child grow sick in rented rooms while Sir Alfred preserved his precious reputation. Interesting indeed. And last night? Miss Marple asked softly. Peter closed his eyes briefly. He said confessing publicly would cleanse his conscience. Bitter laughter escaped him. Conscience? He shook his head slowly. After 12 years. Interesting indeed. So you stabbed him? Yes. Interesting indeed. The solicitor rubbed trembling hands together. He kept speaking about redemption, about forgiveness. Peter looked upward suddenly, grief and fury mingling terribly across his face. But Eleanor died before hearing any apology. Silence filled the room heavily. Interesting indeed. And the clock? Inspector Finch demanded sharply. Peter nodded weakly. I needed time shifted later. Otherwise I stood alone with him too long after the argument. Interesting indeed. The knitting needle? Lydia left her sewing basket beside the piano. Interesting indeed. Peter swallowed painfully. I broke the needle pushing it into the mechanism. Very interesting indeed. And the missing confession page? Asked Miss Marple gently. I burned it after discovering Reeves named directly. Peter laughed bitterly again. I wanted Sir Alfred exposed, not everyone else destroyed beside him. Interesting indeed. Human beings rarely committed perfectly selfish crimes, perhaps. Even murderers preserved strange loyalties. Doctor. Reeves looked toward Peter silently now. Interesting indeed. Not anger there. Something closer to pity, perhaps. Arthur finally spoke quietly. So another innocent man almost suffered because of this. Very interesting indeed. Peter looked toward him with devastated eyes. Yes. Interesting indeed. And there perhaps lay the cruelest irony of the all. A wrongful conviction once destroyed Arthur Vale. Now another nearly destroyed Dr. Reeves, the pattern repeating itself almost perfectly. Because guilt, fear, and silence rarely ended cleanly once begun. Snow over Ashcombe. Peter Wainwright confessed before noon, quietly, completely, without resistance. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch took the statement inside the study where Sir Alfred Pennington had died, while snow continued falling gently beyond the windows as though the countryside itself wished covering every unpleasant thing beneath white silence. But human actions never disappeared so easily. Interesting indeed. The atmosphere inside Blackthorn Cottage afterward felt strangely hollow rather than dramatic. No raised voices, no hysterics, only exhaustion. Miss Lydia Pennington sat motionless near the drawing-room fire, twisting a handkerchief slowly between pale fingers, while Arthur Vale stood beside the window watching drifting snow. Interesting indeed. 2 lives stolen differently by the same chain of cowardice and secrecy. Miss Marple felt profound sadness for both. Peter Wainwright emerged eventually from the study accompanied by Inspector Finch and a constable. He looked older somehow than he had 48 hours earlier. Oh, interesting indeed. Confession aged people rapidly, perhaps. Before leaving, Peter paused uncertainly near the drawing-room doorway. Then quietly, Arthur. Interesting indeed. Arthur turned slowly toward him. Peter swallowed painfully. I should have spoken years ago. Yes, Arthur replied calmly. Interesting indeed. No anger now, perhaps. Only tired truth. Peter lowered his eyes. I loved Eleanor. Arthur remained silent several moments. Then softly, I know. Interesting indeed. The solicitor's face tightened faintly with grief. She never recovered after the trial. Not completely. He looked toward the snow-covered gardens beyond the window. Every time she heard church bells she thought of prison gates closing. Interesting indeed. Poor Eleanor indeed. Not murdered, perhaps, yet destroyed all the same. Peter's voice weakened further. When our daughter became ill, he stopped briefly. Eleanor still believed Sir Alfred might someday admit the truth. Interesting indeed. Hope, perhaps. Cruel thing sometimes. Arthur looked away toward the falling snow. And did he? Yes, Peter whispered brokenly. Much too late. Interesting indeed. The constable touched Peter's arm gently afterward, and the solicitor finally left the room without another word. Silence lingered heavily once the door closed behind him. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch removed his hat tiredly. A miserable business. Yes, Miss Marple replied softly. Interesting indeed. The inspector hesitated near the fireplace. One thing still troubles me. Interesting indeed. Only one? A faint smile crossed his face despite everything. The murder itself I understand now. But not the deeper part. He frowned thoughtfully. Why wait 12 years? Very interesting indeed. Miss Marple folded her knitting quietly. Because people convince themselves silence protects others. She glanced toward Arthur gently. At first, perhaps they even believe it. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred protected reputation. Judge Reeves protected his son. Peter protected Eleanor. Eleanor protected Arthur from further scandal, perhaps. And gradually silence hardened into habit impossible escaping. Interesting indeed. Inspector Finch sighed heavily. All that suffering because people feared embarrassment. Yes. Interesting indeed. Human beings committed astonishing cruelties merely to avoid humiliation. Lydia spoke suddenly for the first time in nearly an hour. My uncle wasn't entirely evil. Interesting indeed. And no one answered immediately. Then Miss Marple said gently, No, I don't believe he was. Interesting indeed. Sir Alfred Pennington had been proud, cowardly perhaps, weak when courage mattered most. Yet remorse eventually reached him. Too late, certainly. Still genuine, perhaps. Interesting indeed. Lydia stared into the fire quietly. He used to say judges never truly retire. Her voice trembled faintly. That every sentence follows them home eventually. Ah, very interesting indeed. Quite true indeed, perhaps. Later that afternoon, roads finally cleared enough for travel beyond Ashcombe Village. Inspector Finch arranged transport for guests returning home, while servants reopened long-shuttered windows, letting cold, fresh air sweep gradually through Blackthorn Cottage. Interesting indeed. Houses after murder always seemed desperate breathing again. Miss Marple prepared departure shortly before dusk, while pale sunlight faded across endless snow-covered fields surrounding the cottage. Arthur Vale approached her quietly near the entrance hall. Interesting indeed. He looked tired now. Older perhaps, but lighter somehow too. A man finally released from invisible prison. You believed me from the beginning, he said softly. Miss Marple smiled faintly. My dear Mr. Vale, innocent people often carry anger differently. Interesting indeed. Arthur glanced toward the silent grandfather clock still standing beside the hallway. I used to imagine revenge constantly, he admitted quietly, during prison especially. He paused thoughtfully. But seeing Sir Alfred frightened and guilty that night, he shook his head faintly. Hatred became strangely unimportant. Interesting indeed. Yes, Miss Marple said gently, because revenge rarely heals what was actually damaged. Interesting indeed. Arthur looked toward Lydia then, who stood nearby speaking softly with servants. She stayed. Yes. Interesting indeed. A small thing perhaps, yet not small at all. Love surviving disgrace always interested Miss Marple greatly. Before leaving, Arthur hesitated briefly. What happens now? Interesting indeed. Miss Marple considered carefully. You begin again, perhaps. Interesting indeed. Not easy, certainly. Still possible. Outside, the evening sky darkened slowly above white fields and black winter trees while smoke curled upward from distant Ashcombe chimneys. Peaceful once more, or appearing peaceful at least. Interesting indeed. As Miss Marple's carriage rolled away from Blackthorn Cottage through narrowing, snow-covered lanes, she looked back one final time toward the isolated old house, standing silent among frozen hedgerows. A beautiful place, a lonely place, and like so many houses, one that concealed years of sorrow beneath respectable walls. Interesting indeed. Mrs. Turner later told half the village the storm itself felt cursed afterward. But Miss Marple knew better. Storms merely trapped people together. The real danger came from quieter things entirely. Pride, cowardice, and guilt allowed growing silently year after year until finally, Like snow gathering unnoticed upon a rooftop, the weight became too heavy for any structure to bear.